of course, chronologically, we would go back to the Nebraska game, but everybody wants to talk about the playoff rankings. And since they were just released last night, Steve, let's start with you because I talked about it for 3 hours last night after they were released. So I've got plenty to say on this, and people have plenty to say on it. What's your initial take? What do you think's important here?
I had a lot of things as I was watching it unfold. I was covering the Ohio State Akron game last night. The interviews were over, and we were all back in the room, in the workroom, watching Reese Davis and the guys go through the top 25. And it seemed like they took inordinately a long time to get from point A to point B and spent. I mean, they put the first five up like 25-21 and spent like a minute discussing Utah, and I'm finally screaming in the work, no one cares about Utah,
Especially since they shouldn't be ranked.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like nobody. I mean, they're in there, and Penn State's not, and that's kind of the first thing that I think caught my attention. But then I really liked what they did with that whole Wisconsin, Purdue, Iowa cluster that they had. They seemed to have a pretty good handle on how that needed to go, which at Purdue, I mean, I tweeted out that I didn't know how Purdue wasn't in the AP top 25. They're number 26, and how Auburn is like 17, and both teams are 6-3. And on game day, the highest ranked teams Auburn's beaten were both in the teens, Arkansas and Mississippi State, whereas on game day, Purdue has beaten number 2 and number 3, one of whom is still in the top 10. The other one's still ranked as high or higher than Arkansas or Mississippi State are. And yet Auburn gets this special dispensation from the Pope that, they got beat by double digits at Texas A&M. Well, they're still number 15 in my ballot. It's like, give me a freaking break. I mean, I just don't know what people are looking at, but, Auburn carries the cachet and Purdue doesn't. So, whatever. But as we got to the top of it, I was stunned that Oklahoma is still as low as they are, although they've got room, obviously, to move up. But Baylor and Oklahoma State here still to play. So, I think if they win those games, you will see them inch a little higher, probably. I mean, Michigan State obviously have tough games here down the stretch. Michigan at Penn State, Michigan State at Ohio State, and then Michigan State, Penn State, the last game of the season, and Ohio State, Michigan, obviously. So I think one or both of them will fall by the wayside with a second loss, and potentially Oklahoma will, rocket their way further up the list a little bit. Notre Dame is still lurking, which – we can debate that. Their schedule this year is uncharacteristically soft compared to what it normally is. But then we get back up to the top, and Cincinnati is perfectly positioned at number 5. As I told our guys privately, what I think is going to happen is Georgia will beat Alabama. Alabama will go to the back of the line, and it'll be Georgia 1 versus Cincinnati 4 in a rematch of their bowl game from last year. And then I figure Ohio State, if they win these ranked games at the end, would eclipse Oregon and move ahead of them and be 2 versus 3. But that's all semantics. That's which side of the field you're on and what color jersey you wear. That's if Oregon can run the table. And, that's what it would be in the other semifinal, a rematch from earlier in the season, which my recollection, I don't think we've ever had. Well, I guess wasn't there a rematch with did Notre Dame and Clemson, was that a rematch just this past year? Is that right? Or
they had a rematch in the ACC championship game.
Oh, that was the rematch. Okay, thank you. I don't think the playoffs ever had a rematch, so maybe this is the year for that. And this is the year for Cincinnati. I think the committee made it pretty clear that they don't care if Cincinnati beats a 2-win team by 1 point. They're still going to be right where they are. They're looking at body of work, and I'm okay with that. They're not prisoners of the moment, although with Michigan State, they were prisoners of the moment. So I don't know. That's my long and short of it. I took about 3-4 minutes there of our time with my overall upshot of it, but maybe I'm off base on something, but I don't know. What did you guys think about how it all unfolded?
Well, obviously Oklahoma is where it is because it couldn't even beat anybody last week. Granted, they were off, but my view on Cincinnati is if there were 5 teams in the playoffs, Cincinnati would be 6. If there were 8 teams in the playoffs, Cincinnati would be 9. I just don't know. I think Cincinnati's just going to need some help. I mean, even if some things clear out in front of them, it's that whole group of 5 thing. Their 2 marquee wins. Indiana has proven to be nothing, and I know Notre Dame is 9, but Notre Dame just, I mean, for me, for whatever that's worth, I haven't been overly impressed with them. I mean, they're winning games like they're supposed to, but they're not necessarily going out and just putting teams on notice. But the only team that's really kind of doing that this year is UGA. I do have a big problem with Penn State not being ranked. Had a chance to talk to Mark a little bit before we went live. He mentioned Utah being a team that maybe doesn't need to be where it's at. I'm certainly with Steve on the Auburn situation. I think Auburn probably is just propped up because of the conference they're in. That little patch on the front of their jersey means more than the name on their jersey, because I just don't see it there. It's interesting where head-to-head matters here and it doesn't matter there, and it just seems like we've already started to see the sliding scale, and we're only 2 weeks into the college football playoff rankings. So, Tony and I were on a show where we talked about this at length for an hour and 41 minutes. So I think I've put all my thoughts out there. So I'm still trying to regather them and see if I can come up with anything fresh. But at this point, I'm just not overly impressed with what the committee threw out there.
Yeah, I was shocked by the Penn State thing, especially when, as they're going down to revealing it, you have Auburn at 17, Wisconsin at 18, 2 teams that Penn State has beaten. And you just to see them continue to not show up was surprising to me, especially when the committee is instructed to take injuries into account, injuries, absences, COVID, all of these things into account. And I think we can all agree that if Sean Clifford had been healthy all season, they wouldn't have lost to Iowa and they wouldn't have lost to Illinois. He got knocked out of the Iowa game and with the lead, and the lead went away. Illinois, he was hobbled. He played, I think, the entire thing, but clearly he was not healthy. I mean, just watch him try to get through any of those 18 overtimes, and you would have seen a 60% Sean Clifford. And then he plays pretty well against Ohio State. Of course, they lose that, as they should, to Ohio State. So that was the main one for me. I was also shocked by the Michigan State thing. And I remember being after week 2, after Ohio State lost, saying head-to-head is not everything when it comes to this committee. It just depends on what they feel like that day. And clearly we saw head-to-head was not everything. Michigan State losing is what cost them. The amazing thing, though, was during the teleconference, Gary Barta said that they were even talking about Michigan State after the Michigan State game in terms of who should be ranked higher. And the very fact that they are talking about that the very week that one team just beat the other tells you that results on the field only matter if they like the results. And this is all going to be eventually an eye test. And I don't know, maybe it should. But I also felt coming off of this, the reason they said Ohio State and Oregon was still tied together, basically because both teams neither looked much better than the other this past week in their wins, meaning if Ohio State would just look better in their wins, they're going to go to 3. And if Ohio State looks better than Oregon in their wins, they'll jump Oregon. So head-to-head, I mean, it's pretty much out the window at this point if they feel one team is better than the other. I don't know from watching these 2 teams that you can't feel that Ohio State is better than Oregon right now, or at least in the last month, especially when they feel that Michigan is a more complete team than Michigan State from watching them all season long and over the last month, because that's what they said. They just feel Michigan is a more complete team offensively and defensively than Michigan State. I don't know if I agree with that, but that's where they are, and so that's the way they went. And it's always an interesting exercise in, I don't want to say excuse making, but excuse presentation from the committee when we get them on the phone to get them locked in on their words, only to see them go to the land of wind and ghosts one week and come up with something new the next week.